Good afternoon. My name is Mark Kirshner. I'm the Director of Planning with the Piedmont Authority for Regional Transportation. Thank you for taking the time to view this webinar about a freight study that is taking place here in the Piedmont Triad. What we want to do very quickly is to give a quick overview of the freight study, when it started, what we've completed thus far, and what needs to be completed. Then there is a portion of this study that requires some additional data, and we will be going through how we want to try to collect that data with an RMove app. This data is very important towards the completion of that model. And then at the end, we will talk a little bit more specifically about how you can help us finish this project up. So the first thing I wanted to do is talk about the study area. When we talk about the Piedmont Triad, that has a lot of different connotations for a lot of different people. And in this particular case, our study area is there bounded in green. This is what we call the travel demand model study area. It is a combined boundary of all four of the metropolitan planning organizations that do our transportation planning here within the region. And you can see those individual MPO areas in the different shades of blue. So there is an MPO area for Winston-Salem, for High Point, which also includes most of Davidson County, for Guilford County, as well as the Burlington-Graham area. So these four MPOs make up the Piedmont Triad travel demand model study area. So all the data that we collect and all of the model processes that we run are within that green bounded area. So this study actually started back in May 2015 with phase one, and that was an effort to collect a lot of database information about freight facilities here within the region. There was a small survey that was done as part of that phase as well, but a lot of it was internet and actually Google Earth research to create that database. Phase two was the development of the actual model, which is a tour-based model, which we will talk about very briefly in just a second. And right now, we are in phase three, which is the collection of some local travel diary information that we hope to complete up and wrap up by the end of October. So phase one, again, was the collection of a lot of data, existing freight facilities, a lot of research that involves some phone calling, but also visiting establishments, and then just, honestly, a lot of telephone and Google Earth research to have a good idea where the facilities were, what the commodities were that were already being dealt with here within the region. But it did not contain any real travel diary information. The second piece was the development of this advanced freight model. The Piedmont Triad is one of a handful of regions that have taken this step to develop this type of model. So it's a little bit unique in terms of travel demand modeling here within the United States. We recognize that this model is very data intensive, and we recognize that as freight carriers and drivers that you already do a lot of data collection and reporting yourself to comply with both state and federal regulations. But this travel demand model for freight is so sophisticated that it requires yet another level of information. And one of those reasons why is within this graphic, the red, green, and blue lines more accurately represent the travel patterns of a van or delivery truck, or even semi-truck that's making deliveries within a region. As you all know, it's a tour. It's not just going from point A to point B. It's picking up several loads and delivering them at different locations, as opposed to the black part of the diagram that's in the lower right-hand corner, which right now the travel demand model just looks at people going from point A to point B. So it does not take into consideration trips that are linked together as part of a larger trip. and it certainly doesn't recognize the tour that freight traffic takes. So this tour-based freight model will represent the characteristics of firms and shipments. It's going to represent specific supply chains. It's going to capture that trip chaining that I talked about, or the actual tour that a truck takes. And it's going to differentiate between freight and commercial vehicles and the goods and services that they are carrying and that they are shipping. And one of the great things that we're going to get out of this tool is an actual visualization of the outputs. So for our metropolitan planning organizations, once a scenario is run, we will have very detailed information about truck travel during the time of day, the commodity, the size of the truck. And this is going to be really, really important in terms of transportation planning as we move forward within the region. As I said, we do have a travel demand model that's used for planning purposes, but it does not accurately represent freight and freight movements within the region. And once we accurately capture those, it will have an influence on future highway projects and other transportation improvements within the region. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colin Smith. Colin is with RS&G. They are a consultant that is working with us on this project. And Colin is going to go through how the drivers can participate and help us out with this study.
All right, thanks, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. As Mark said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the freight driver survey, and take a little tour of how you install the app to take the survey, and how you then drivers can complete the survey. So we'll step through that. And Mark, I just wanted to check that you've given me control of the screen.
Yes, I just tried to do that. There you go.
All right, great. Thanks very much. So we'll move on. We'll go through the purpose of the survey, add a little detail to what Mark just kind of took us through, and then focus on the actual workings of the app itself, and then we can close out with some common questions around issues like data privacy and other factors that we want people to bear in mind. So Mark touched on some of these, but really there's two main types of data that we want to collect. First, about how the truck itself moves through the region each day, the number of tours it takes each day, the number of stops made, types of tours, for example, whether the truck's going just kind of an out and back with a single stop or making multiple stops. And then a little bit about what the truck is doing, you know, what its activities are while it travels, you know, the types of commodities that are on board, the freight deliveries, how much is being delivered at each stop, if it's a service, the truck providing, where the driver's providing services, what types of services they're providing. So that'll it's intended to help us refine the model that we've already developed and get a better kind of understanding of how truck drivers are making decisions as they travel through the region that'll affect, you know, the types of roads that they use, and essentially will feed into the planning process so that we better capture the needs and impacts of trucks as they travel. Really, the main kind of outcomes then from the driver survey feed into the planning process, and essentially, you know, we're if we better represent freight and truck movement in the region, the planning process will better be able to plan to reduce congestion that affects truck movements, do things like identify strategic corridors and parking areas that are needed for heavier trucks, and as technologies change, as vehicle types change, we'll better be able to kind of capture those in the planning process. And you know, all in all, really, we all have an interest, I think, in helping the region remain competitive, and so that's a sort of a key outcome. we move on to what the app itself. It's an app called RMove, which RSG has developed. It's a cell phone app, and it's specifically designed to collect travel information from drivers. It's a type of app that's kind of GPS enabled. So it automatically collects much of the information we need as people travel. So via sensors in the smartphone, it's recording kind of a GPS points about where the person is as they make their travel. But then we add on the very short surveys after each trip about some of the information we talked about, what the truck is carrying, what happened at the particular stop. And we also do surveys at the end of each day just to kind of wrap up what happened during the course of the day as the truck driver went about his work. In order to incentivize drivers to take the survey, once they've completed 3 days of surveys, they'll be eligible for a $40 incentive. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the app itself. In order to obtain and install the app, it's very, it's like any other kind of smartphone app. We've programmed it for both Android and Apple. So the driver would go to the store for their phone and install the app. Once they open the app up after installation, enter a password, and which is you can find the password on the website ncfreight.org. It's essentially NC commercial, and then review that. The drivers will be able to kind of read the privacy statement, and then once they've enabled location services, they'll go through a short survey to make sure that they qualify. And then after the 3 days are up, the driver will be able to kind of upload their data and obtain their incentive. So as I mentioned, after each trip that the driver makes, the app notifies them that their survey is ready, which they can take either right away or do them all at the end of the day, whichever they prefer and whichever's easier for them. So at the end of the day, they'll see something kind of a screen like this, where they have their daily survey and a list of the trips that they've taken. And any surveys that they have to do, there's a little orange circle by, so they can, as I said, kind of do them one by one or all together at the end of the day. So within each of the trip records, trip surveys, the driver is able to kind of go and take a look at what they did. So they're shown a map, and they can, well, that looks like the trip I took, or they can kind of edit it if something wasn't quite right. If everything looks okay, they'll just kind of continue into the survey. And then within each survey itself, first they're asked if it was a trip made for work. We're really only interested in trips made for work. So it's a non-work trip. Maybe they were driving they have a vehicle that they use for both, personal travel as well. Or they were, so they'll just click no in that case. But if they were making a work trip, they'll click yes, and they'll go on to get the survey will ask them about what they were doing on that trip, providing services, picking up material, etc. And there's also a question about the type of vehicle that they were in. So it's about 3 or 4 questions, really just adds a little bit of detail to what the phone can kind of capture itself in terms of the mapping. So at the end of each trip, it's probably only 1 or 2 minutes of work for the driver, or at the end of the day, they'll have a few minutes to kind of complete those. So I'm going to move on to a little bit about recruiting drivers. I guess the first most important, or first thing is who are we interested in having complete the survey? Who qualifies as a commercial driver? So really, these are the criteria. So it's anybody who's making work trips in the Piedmont Triad region who either ships, hauls, picks up, drops off, or delivers freight or materials of any kind. And I'll come back to the asterisks in a moment. Delivery drivers who are dropping off packages, supplies, or any other item, and then or people who are driving commercial vehicles to provide services. So people like contractors, landscapers, cleaners, road crews, public works drivers, etc., who aren't necessarily moving freight shipments, but they're driving a commercial vehicle and going to a site to maybe do some construction work or what have you. The one class of drivers that we are not interested in are drivers who are moving people as their primary cargo. So that's taxi drivers, Ubers, buses, etc. So anybody who falls into that category isn't eligible for the survey. In some cases, businesses might be willing to share just the kind of trace data with the Department of Transportation. We, in order to use the data for the model that's been developed and to kind of have all of the details necessary to incorporate different truck behavior, we really need to know some of the extra information that goes beyond just where the stops start and where the trips start and stop, etc. So it's really important that we get the consistent set of surveys from drivers and aren't missing some of that information from some of the groups. So again, what is this information going to be used for? In its ultimate form, it'll be held to direct funding towards enhancements that benefit the freight and logistics industry, to plan for projects that relieve traffic congestion on the highways, and to help identify strategic corridors that can accommodate heavier trucks, and ultimately those using new technologies. So in short, the data is going to be used to plan for the future of commercial vehicle travel in the region. Something I know that where businesses are concerned about is whether doing this type of survey will interfere with drivers' ability to do their work. And our intention is that absolutely it will not. As I mentioned, there's a relatively short set of questions that drivers are asked to complete after each trip. And as I mentioned, if they're busy, they can ignore that and complete those surveys at the end of the day, or even at the end of the 3 or 4 days, all in one go. So they're able to do that when they're out of the vehicle, not driving in their own time. We're also very aware that the data that we're collecting is proprietary data. So we are very clear in our privacy document that we include in the app. We do not sell or share any personally identifiable information, except with with parts and NCDOT. We don't use data for ads. Really the way we use the data in our analysis is in aggregate. We combine other data from all of the different respondents together and analyze it together. It's an individual's trips is relatively anecdotal. It's only of value once it's kind of grouped together into larger sets. And we use a lot of the industry standard protocols to kind of remove and protect any personally identifiable information. Clearly, we would never share or present or share the data in any way that could undermine business or proprietary information, or even allow an individual business to be identified. Why should you participate? So there's a short-term benefit to the drivers. We'll be paying them $40 for their help over the 3 days of completing the surveys, and then in the longer term, I think we all have an interest in helping NCDOT in part incorporate the the needs of the trucking industry into transportation planning so that they can be more responsive to the industry's needs. So with that, thanks for your attention, and I'll hand it back to Mark, and I think he's going to open it up for any questions.
Yes, thank you, Colin. I'm going to open up the line in just a second for people to ask questions if we have any. We are recording this webinar so it can be replayed later, so bear that in mind as you are thinking about asking a question. Our emails will show up towards the very end so that you can email us if you have any particular question. There is a project webpage that will have some of the instructions about the RMove application, and that's the webpage address right there, www.ncfreight.org. There are also some attachments. If you are familiar with GoToMeeting and you are familiar with the dashboard that you have with this, there should be a little section with handouts. And so those handouts are attached. There is a one-page kind of overview of the freight study, its importance and benefits. Then there's also a one-pager that has the instructions for the RMove app. And then we have also included a PDF of the presentation that you've seen today. So with that, I'm going to unmute everyone. And if you've done these GoToMeetings before, if there's some feedback, I may have to mute everyone back, but we'll just see what happens here. I'm going to unmute all the attendees. Unmute on. Okay, so let me try that. Is anyone out there, do they have a particular question? I think I just successfully unmuted everyone. Well, hearing no questions at the moment, I think what we want to close with specifically is that this is really our second round of trying to get the driver surveys completed. We understand a number of the challenges. We simply don't have the relationships that we need. We want to correct that. I think at the state level, they're attempting to create that with the statewide freight plan. But we also know that drivers are out on the road during the driving, so it is very difficult to reach them as well. So we know that there are challenges with just taking time out of their day, some of those issues that Colin represented. But so we are trying a little bit new effort, trying to reach out a little bit more to individuals, and it's really about that personal touch. There are a number of people within our metropolitan planning organizations, again, that are part of this project. So there's a lot of interest in it, and there's a lot of people that know people. So we're really looking for folks that understand the project, understand the benefits, and are willing to share this information. Ideally, willing to share it with drivers and encourage and have them participate. We have collected about 25% of the driver data that we need. There was another portion of the project that collected establishment survey information. We have 100% of that. So we're really looking for this driver survey information. I want to emphasize again that even though there was a lot of reporting, both on the federal and state level to comply with regulations, the information that's required for this sophisticated tour-based freight model is just not readily available. The tour-based freight model will give us information about commodities, time of day, locations, types of vehicles, and this information is so important in terms of the overall transportation planning process, as well as project evaluations. So when a new highway or interchange ramp is being built or reworked, having this information about the freight movements is going to have a positive impact on making sure that that transportation improvement and our overall investments meet the needs of the freight industry. It's something that's been missing within our overall transportation planning processes, and I think the state has recognized that. This model is just for the Piedmont Triad, as I mentioned, but the Triangle area as well as the Charlotte area are looking at implementing some sort of similar type of model, all again because we recognize the benefits that the freight industry and the importance that it has within our community. So I am asking for your help in terms of getting this project completed. And the ways, again, that you can help is to share this information within your own company, share it with drivers as much as you can, encourage them to participate. Again, there are handouts there that you can download. My contact information is right there, markk@partnc.org. If you have any questions following this webinar, also if you want to contact Colin at RS&G. Tristan Cherry could not join us today, but he is another project team member at RSG that's working on this survey. You will also get a quick survey via email after this webinar. It's 5 questions. We appreciate if you would fill that out. So with that, I'll open and see again if anyone has any particular questions or would like to say anything or make any comments. If not, we'll close out the webinar right on time. Well, hearing none, again, we thank you for your time and attention today, and we are closed. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know, and hope you can find a way to share this information and get drivers to participate. Thank you for joining us today.